Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of House of League with myself, James Smales, our rugby editor, Matt Shaw, and Josh McAllister. The three of us coming out swinging this week like a Ben Garcia right hand. More of that, actually, later on. We will come to that and the disciplinary. Lots to go at this week, so we might have to just rattle through a few things. I want to start with Salford because why not? We haven't started with Salford for a good few weeks now. Not a positive story, which is a shame. Another player leaving. Sam Stunn didn't play last week. Said, he was going to withdraw himself from the squad, which left them one short. Looks like he's off to Warrington now, who by all accounts, he's been speaking to since the start of season. Paul Rowley's basically said he's fine with it. As he is, he's not going to stand in anyone's way in the situation. But again, when it had gone quiet for a few weeks, underlines the frustration of what's going on and the difficulty for the club at the minute.
Yeah, I think Paul Rowley's probably irked by this because of the timing, isn't he? Sam Stunn's missed most of the season injured. Comes back not too long ago and then stands himself down a day before a game, which leaves them in limbo. I don't think anyone, including Paul Rowley, could blame players for wanting to leave. This is a club that's got an HMRC bill hanging over its head in 2 weeks' time, less than 2 weeks' time. So you can understand that. But it does seem like maybe the timing's been poor. Paul Rowley's mentioned a couple of times, hasn't he, that there are other clubs into his players all the time. So this is probably one example of that, which is poor practice, but, that's rugby. I don't think there's any issue from what he said with Sam Stunn leaving, but the way he's gone about facilitating the move, a bit like the Dion Cross one seemed to bother him as well. So, but can you blame the players? Not really.
No, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate on the other side of what Matt's saying there, Josh. When else could Sam Stunn do it? He can't move while he's injured. No one's going to sign an injured player. He has to wait till he's fit and up for selection before he can orchestrate the move anyway. Is that
right? Yeah. I don't think that was Paul Rowley's biggest frustration. As he said in the presser after, they spoke about it, I think by the sounds of it, earlier that week, and he said he will facilitate a move. It was the way he came about because it was only on the captain's run on the Saturday that he said he downed his tools and said he wasn't playing. And he said, any decision you make that impacts your teammates isn't a good decision. And that's exactly what happened. It means they couldn't name an 18th man. It means they had to make some late changes. Obviously, whoever was going to be 18th man got promoted to play. So I think the way it came about, but you're right, that he was injured, so no one was going to take him on then. And that's probably why, and he said again that conversations had been going since pre-season. So yeah, just the way it came about.
I suppose it played devil's advocate to that. I completely agree. Warrington, if Warrington have been into Sam Stunn for a while, fair enough. But Salford will have paid all the
medical bills.
You would think so with what's been going. You'd hope they've been paying those medical bills.
Well, somebody's been paying them.
So you could, I think I can see both sides to it. As for Warrington, look, it's a good pick up for them, isn't it? If we're honest about it, Dan Russell hasn't worked to the signing in the back row, so they've needed a back row.
They never really replaced Matty Nicholson. Obviously, they had John Bateman come in mid-season, and they didn't replace Matty Nicholson. They replaced him with Dan Russell, who hadn't played any or much, if at all, NRL games. Played internationally for Papua New Guinea, but just hasn't been doing it, has he, for this year? He's 18th man the last couple of weeks. When you're an overseas player, you can't really afford. You won't be on the biggest money. Matt will probably know more, but when you're an overseas player taking a quota spot, you can't really afford them not to be playing. They just didn't feel the boots of Matty Nicholson.
Okay. As I said, we're going to rattle through quite a lot, so let's move on to the next thing that I want to speak about, which is the Liam Knight transfer, which Dan Tomlinson broke Monday morning, as we record this. He broke it on Monday morning whenever we recorded it. But it was Monday morning. I think we've cleared that up. Saying that he's going to stay at Hull FC next season. There was Warrington again, who were interested. The issue with Hull FC was the quota. They haven't got space. So they're clearly expecting, and they really are expecting, that this quota rule is going to change and go up from 7 to 8 next season. Because if it doesn't, they're going to have some awkward conversations with somebody in that squad because they haven't got enough room. First off, we'll come to the quota. If he does stay at FC, that's a really good pickup for them as well, because maybe not much known about him when he came in for a lot of fans, but he's been terrific since he signed for them.
Yeah, he's been a good signing. And from a club that we're talking about, Warrington, Hull FC haven't got their overseas right more often than not recently, but he's definitely been a good pickup. Middles are hard to come by, so you can understand why Warrington wanted him. There is a bit of risk involved in that while everyone is anticipating an increase in the quota, it's not been signed off yet. And, that will change some plans for Hull FC if it doesn't come off. But, at the same time, I think they'll be okay in that sense. And it's a good piece of business for them now. I don't think they've got a great deal left to do. Maybe one or two more now for Hull FC, 2 at the very most. I think more likely to be 1.
In terms of the quota, and we've touched on this before, Josh, it's not going to affect that many clubs for next season anyway, which is maybe why it's not got this massive push to get it rushed through as quickly as possible. I think it affects a lot of clubs for 2027 and afterwards moving forward, but for 2026, most are there already, aren't they, in terms of not like quota cap, but they're there in terms of salary cap. They haven't got the money to spend anyway.
Yeah, and we're halfway through this season already. So you think, recruitment at most clubs is well underway. I mean, we talk about Hull FC, Hull Care, another club, Willie Peters said he doesn't envisage maybe too much more ins and outs going on there. So you'd think that most clubs that are in that position, won't be looking, or they'll already be sorted because we're halfway through the season. So yeah, might have a bigger impact, as you say, the season after next.
I think what you're likely to see on this is a lot of 1-year contract extensions on existing players this time.
Yeah, okay.
Because as you say, most clubs will suddenly have loads of quota spots, but they don't have the salary cap space. But going into 2027, they can plan more around it. So I think you'll see. I mean, we've already seen Warrington sign Toby King on a 1-year, Paul Vaughan's on a 1-year, Tyrone May signed a 1-year. I think you'll see a lot of 1-year deals this time. And at that point, the clubs can look at it more. What this will do, you will see the price of domestic players drop considerably in the market because there's so few players at the minute and the clubs don't have the quota spots. Players have been able to drive a premium. This will probably drive them back down, the domestic players, because there's suddenly a lot more players that clubs can try. Well, not more players they can go get, there's more options for them to work on. So I think you'll see a bit of only a little quirk in it all, but yeah, it won't be surprised to see those moving parts come to fruition.
And in terms of, there's two more things I want to touch on the back of this. And I'll throw them both out there and you can both answer them as you please. But do we see the salary cap as a result finally going up in the next year or two? Because if you've got more options to bring people in from overseas players cost more money. So will some of the clubs get the way and it goes up, even if that's just by 200,000 or 400,000 or whatever? And secondly, should we be worried that the limit of overseas players going up weakens the English, like selection? Or is it a case of, well, listen, these players get to play with better quality from overseas that will in turn make them better players, and then we're going to have a stronger, whatever, 19 or whatever for England because they're used to playing with quality. I'm aware of throwing a few things at you, but tackle that however
I'll tackle the first one, just on the increased salary cap. There are Super League bosses out there that want to increase. There's some that have talked about that for many years, obviously, not just in Rugby League, but just in life, the rising cost of living and the inflation, and Super League salary cap hasn't gone up with that. So there are Super League bosses that do want an increase in that. So you would imagine there's going to have to be, or there will be some conversations about that. I'll let Matt discuss your second point.
I want to discuss the first point.
Sorry.
Discuss whatever you want.
I don't necessarily think the cap goes up for that reason. I think speaking to quite a few recruitment managers around the quarter, what they want to use the additional quota spots for, and everyone's different, but they see it more for the squad players bringing over. Look at Leeds bringing Cooper Jenkins over. He's a good example of signing someone who they can get a little bit cheaper. They're looking for an opportunity. It's a step up for them. So I think a lot of the recruitment managers are actually looking at that type of play rather than going and signing a load more marquees.
Do we maybe see some of the younger players coming over as well? So the
Yeah.
Queensland Cup
exactly,
type
exactly
players,
what I
maybe
mean.
the 18, 19, 20 life experience.
Precisely that point. I think they're looking more at, most clubs are looking more at signing more players like that because, going back to what I said before, a lot of the domestic players, because there's such little opportunity on the market, they're able to drive the price up.
Yeah.
Because of where the market's at. But if a player's worth 50,000 and you have to pay him 80,000, he's still only worth 50,000. Do Do you know what I mean?
I totally get what you mean.
I don't think we'll see a raft of big name overseas players come with all these additional spots. I think you're more likely to see clubs fill out the spots with, Wakefield have done a great job with Caleb Hamlin-Uele and Kai Rodwell, and even Wigan with Abasmiski. You're more likely. I think you're more likely to see more of them come through than your big name players. And I can't remember what your second point was.
The second point was, what does that do for the English players in terms of the quality and the opportunities that they're getting?
This is my concern. If it's driven up too much, there's going to be less opportunity. That's just natural.
Yeah.
Bring more players in from overseas, there's going to be less opportunity for your domestics. So I am a bit concerned by that. I've no issue with quotas going up on the provision that it's aligned with youth development, because that's, if all clubs just get lazy with it and go, we don't need to worry about that again now, we'll be having this same conversation in another 5-10 years where they want it to go up again. That isn't good for the domestic game.
And feel free to say I'm talking rubbish, most people do. But does it potentially strengthen what's below? So you get a few more maybe drop down into that championship, and we start strengthening some of those championship clubs, which ultimately just makes the game a little bit stronger. I'm not saying that that's a positive that they're having to drop down, but as a result of it, does that maybe help strengthen the championship a little bit in terms of the quality of the English players that are playing in there?
Yeah, it's a fair point, but it's a mixed point because,
I'm not saying it's a good thing.
But I can see your point to be in that, that some players that might not get that Super League opportunity will go into the Championship and increase their standards. And that's good all around for Rugby League, isn't it, to have... Well, we talk that it might be two divisions.
We need a stronger second tier.
Yeah.
I mean, we just do for Super League to fly as we want it to.
Yeah, so it's a fair point. I don't think I've got much to add on that. I think it's a fair point.
Josh doesn't have much to add. We've heard that one before. Let's move on. Let's see if you've got something to add on this. Ben Garcia, I think you did the story. You may not have done the story. You're looking at me as if...
I was watching the game. Yeah, I was watching the game on Friday.
So, swinging arm, shown red, and now he's facing, 6-game ban?
Minimum, yeah.
Yeah, minimum. What are we expecting on that? I mean, there's no getting out of it, is there? There's no mitigating circumstances. I know that you can say, well, there was a bit of pushing or whatever, or somebody did some name calling. I'm not having it. He's come with a swinging arm, which you just do not do. He's gonna get a big ban.
Yeah, he's gonna be found guilty, isn't he? I mean, we've recorded this. I know, we record this. We sent this on C. Yeah, we record this Monday, and this comes out Tuesday, so anything can happen. But it's there. I mean, I can't remember the last time in Super League we saw a player actually swing and throw a punch, and I think he threw two. I think he landed one on Minchella, and then I think he went for Whitbread, but ended up hitting Mikey Lewis. Yeah, so it's
looked like he had a clenched fist pretty much after that as well.
He would try to throw a third, but I think there were too many bodies in the way by then, wasn't there?
And that was just pure frustration from the Catalans Dragon captain, because that was an awful night for them. It was the longest, they set a record for the longest minutes without scoring a point, beating Wakefield's previous, I think was 259. I think they're over 300 minutes now. Eventually Luke Carey broke that in the second half, and it was their biggest ever Super League defeat. So it was just pure frustration for Ben Garcia. But now it just makes things worse for Joel Tompkins at Catalans, because they're going to be without their captain for at least 6 weeks.
Yeah, there's no way he don't get less than that, is there?
Not a chance. Not a chance.
My worry.
I have nothing to add on this one. It's very clear, isn't it?
Make the same comment. He's nothing to add.
Well, no, Matt usually does have something to add, which is what I'm going to highlight. When last week on this podcast, please people find it, clip it, and copy him in. Matt gave us 2 guarantees, and that was that Jesse Sue would get a ban for his spitting incident in the Challenge Cup final, and Catalans would beat Hull Kingston Rovers.
In hindsight, I made a mistake.
In the game.
But
talk us through those two brilliant decisions.
Other than those two statements, I was right. So I wasn't far off.
It's just them 2 things that you got wrong.
I'm still surprised that Suaso Sue got off. Just the wording. We haven't seen the full minutes, have we? The really detailed ones. But I think the statement in the RFL, the Operational Rules Tribunal, while they didn't contest that he did spit. They didn't think it was
with intent,
deliberately or with intent. Right? Okay. Now I'm not challenging that. That's all.
Well, when we say he intended to spit, but not at fuel.
I'm not challenging that. I think, Sawasi Su's got good record, a good character, never had an incident like this in his career. So I'm not disputing that for a minute. However, I just think, let's take Ben Garcia this week. Imagine if they turn around and go, while we don't deny that Ben Garcia did throw a punch, we don't believe he deliberately meant to hit Elliot Minchella in the head. Now, that might seem like a really stupid comparison, but let's do it with a high tackle. Let's apply the same word into a high tackle. While we don't deny the player did commit a high tackle, we don't think he did it deliberately or with intent. Well, that they still get banned for that. For a high. So why is it different?
Well, you can't prove intent. Can't prove intent.
No,
you can't. You can't on anything really. So I was surprised that he got off with the explanation that was given. I really was. We probably need to see the minutes in the full detail to get a better understanding how they came to that conclusion. And I don't necessarily, like I said, I don't necessarily disagree. I'm not saying that he purposely meant to spit on him. I was just very surprised the wording they came out with, because you could apply it to so many other things. Yes. But they'd still charged him, So I was surprised.
Great defence on that one, but what about your prediction?
Yeah, I got that one wrong.
There was at one point when it looked like Wigan were going to lose to Huddersfield Giants, having that conversation we had last week when I was tipping Rovers for the treble, and I thought 4 points clear, massive points difference. Jesse Sue's got off on his ban. Reece Martin's coming back, which, be great for them. I don't think we've even discussed how much they've probably... Well, they haven't missed him, and that's the good thing, but what a player to have back for second half of the season. Everything was looking like it was coming up red and white, and it still might do, but obviously the late try for Wigan took some of my shine off my my bragging.
It's a long season.
It is a long season. Just so long as I'm right and you're wrong, that's literally all that matters. Always talk to me about the Challenge Cup. You've put another story up on Monday and saying that, look, there's going to be a big review into the Challenge Cup finals day as a whole, not the final itself. We know that's back at Wembley next year. The date's booked in. Down the line, there might be a conversation if it stays at Wembley, but at the minute it's booked in. But they're looking at the finals. We discussed it last week. Yeah. The frustration around the 1895 and kicking off after the game, the lack of crowd, the lack of atmosphere. Featherstone selling, 600, 700 tickets.
In fairness to Fev, you're right, but I did think there appeared to be more than 700 Fev fans.
It did actually look like more.
They looked like they had more than York, and York claimed that they'd sold 3,000, which I also would contest based on what we saw. But by the by.
That's by the by. But they're looking at the finals day as a structure like we had this year.
Yeah, basically, it doesn't commercially stack up. The games cost around 100 grand each to show, the 1895 and the Women's Challenge Cup final at Wembley. You need to sell a fair few tickets to make that commercially make sense, and they're not doing. So I think the Women's Challenge Cup will stay because there is a value in the fact the BBC show it, which is good aesthetically, but also good for the growth of the game. We need to get as many girls playing the sport, so understand that, and it does get good national exposure as the Women's Challenge Cup final. Generally speaking,
we give it plenty of build up ourselves.
Well, let's be honest, we gave that more coverage than the 1895 Cup final too, and I think there's a general theme there. So I can understand that. The 1895, I think it'll go. It's not ideal what they do anyway, putting it on after the Challenge Cup final. We spoke about it last week. But, it's a pain for supporters to try to get back for trains. It can be a rush, especially if you win and you want to see the celebrations. So you've got that.
Sorry to interrupt. Do we keep the competition now, move it to
well,
Blackpool?
I think it's part of a bigger picture, isn't it, with the whole conferences which we've spoken about. Are they coming in? Are they not? Could you look at reviving Summer Bash, which personally was always my favourite weekend of the year? So you've got... Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there. Does the 1895 have a future? Hard to know. I think it'd be a shame to lose it, and the players obviously value it. And I think the fans of the team do get their value, but it's got to commercially make sense, and at the minute it just doesn't.
You said it then and I said it last week. like the Northern Rail Cup final, take it back to Bloomfield Road. If we're not to have a summer bash, which I was also a fan of in my hometown, that was in Blackpool until it moved. Yeah, I think Blackpool, if they can make it work, makes sense to have the 8.5 Cup final. Now, it's not as special as Wembley, but the fans will still support it. And the Northern Rail Cup final was still appreciated and well attended.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple of little transfer bits from the NRL. I just want to discuss Jackson Hastings coming out, basically saying not interested in the Super League return, want to stay in the NRL is his preference. Dom Young's had that crazy situation where he plays for the Chucks against the Knights and then ends up swapping over. So he's now a Newcastle Knights player again, leaving Sydney Roosters. Josh, give us a little thoughts on them two stories.
Yeah, that Dom Young one, that's a bizarre one. He plays for Sydney Roosters on the Saturday, and then on the Monday he's announced as a Newcastle Knights. And interestingly, Sydney Roosters beat Newcastle Knights. So, how that plays down the line and
but
for
that's
the
going back
playoffs.
to his old club, and that he didn't really want to leave in the first place.
No, I don't think Newcastle wanted him to leave. He left, I think, on a lot of money. He left on a 4-year deal. He's only 18 months into that deal. It was a big money deal. Newcastle Knights never wanted to let him go, so obviously they're happy to have him back. He was a record breaker with his tries in his debut season. They broke a club record. On Jackson Hastings, yeah, he's been told that his services are no longer required at Newcastle Knights beyond this season. Adam O'Brien has other preferences in the halves, but he says that he wants to stay in the NRL. He's not looking at Super League just yet. That's his ambitions. Obviously, he's been linked. He's always linked. I think every year since he's gone back to the NRL, he's been linked with the Super League. But yeah, he said that his goal is to remain in Australia.
And we talk about someone else that's linked all the time, and that's Owen Farrell, just because of the name. He's never going to play Super League rugby ever, but he still always gets linked, and fans always talk about it. He's just signed for Saracens again, going back to his former club, leaving French rugby and Racing. So we can draw a line through that one.
And I'm sure
until
though
the end of his next contract.
Yeah.
And then we'll bring it out again.
I'm sure Chris Radlinski did say that there was some sort of conversation. Now, I don't think it went that far down the line, but just some sort of conversation that to be had with him. But yeah, I think any Wigan fans listening, I think we can say that one's not going to happen.
Yes, yeah. It's a huge name, isn't it? So he's always going to be linked. St Helens, moving on from Wigan to the other side to St Helens, they've got some issues. I'll come to you again, Josh, because I think you covered this game at the weekend. Joe Batchelor, Kurt Sirenen, both went off injured. George Whitfield is HIA. They've already got some serious issues at that club. They've got Leeds Rhinos this week, so that's not ideal preparation. And they're fighting to make the six. They're in a bit of a tough spot.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say now that they're in a bit of an injury crisis. Jack Wellesby out for, 16 weeks at a time, so 15, 14 more weeks. Now that's saw Tristan Saylor play at full-back, who I thought did well against Salford on Sunday. Kyle Felt made his long-awaited return, I think, for his 6th Super League appearance, scored 4 tries, so that's a boost. But yeah, Curtis Sirenen went off with back spasms. Batchelor went off with a calf injury, and he was frustrated when he came off. He threw his mouth guard on the floor, so obviously he's been struggling with injury so far. George Whitby failed his head injury assessment in the second half, so that's a blow for the next 11 days. Obviously, Leeds Rhinos coming up, as you say. Lewis Murphy also out as well. Yeah, I think they're in a bit of a crisis. James Bell, I don't know if he's had a bit of a setback, but he's still out at the minute. Ignatius Parsi got dropped to the reserves because he's had a bit of a dip in form. So obviously that's not an injury one, but that's for selection.
Named a 13 there.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that Saints are in a bit of an injury crisis. Not a bit, they are in an injury crisis.
Potentially a tough second half to the season for them. Do you think they can still make the 6?
They can, but
they need the injuries to clear up to do it.
There's moving parts, isn't there? Other teams could end up just as bad, but it's a worry. It's a worry. I felt like it was going to end up being a toss-up between them and Hull FC for the final spot, because I think Wakefield will end up being in. However, I'm probably edging towards Hull FC. I certainly was before they lost to Castleford at home.
Let's just finish off really quickly, because I think we've got time just to touch on Hull FC for a couple of minutes. Lost to Huddersfield, who were without a win. They've lost to a Castleford side that I don't think there was many expecting. I've got a few Castleford fans that I know and who we work with who were not expecting a win at all. They keep throwing in these really poor performances, don't they? Which has got to be a worry.
Yeah. Well, in terms of playoff ambitions, because when you've got 3 teams that are poor essentially and not winning many games, the number of games you have to win to finish higher in the league goes up. So you're looking at 15, maybe 16 even. And suddenly that's starting to look like not unfeasible for Hull FC, but it's becoming harder. Certainly harder than it would be if they'd have knocked off Huddersfield and Castleford.
Yeah.
So they've got some work to do. Frustration, really, I suppose, for them, because after the Huddersfield game, they've played quite well.
Yes.
And then just dropped, and the home form is still a massive
It's an
concern.
issue. Yeah. And I know they've lost Will Price, but they put Jordan Banner in there.
So
it's not like you're putting a 17-year-old kid in there, is he? Although they've got a teenager that they could.
You have to accept that you're going to be without some of your better players some of the time, haven't you? The problems come when you're in a Saints position where you've got 8, 9, 10 out. When you've got, and they have got a few out. Let's not get of it, but no more than anyone else, really. Look at the teams at the top of the league. Wigan have had Miski out for most of the year. Havard's been out for most of the year. They had a spell without Luke Thompson. Hull KR have hardly had Reece Martin. Oliver Gildart's a long-term absentee. Mickey McAloram's missed a long period of this. So it's the same everywhere, really.
You risk Hull FC fans comment on this video, don't you, by saying that? But you're right, injuries happen in the season. They do happen to key players. Obviously, they're missing Asiata as well, which is a big player. But it happened last year. I think Jay Field and Ben French missed a large chunk for Wigan. It does happen across your season. And just on Saints, they play Salford again in a couple of weeks. That's another 2 points that you would suspect that they'll get. So that could play a big part as well if it's Hull FC and Saints battling out for 6 and points difference.
I think it's difficult for Hull FC because they're so much further on than anybody expected them to be at the start of the season.
Yes.
But when you've made that sort of progress and you've got a chance of getting in the 6, you can't say, well, nobody expects us to make 6 if we don't qualify. Because it's in their hands now. They've got a good shot at it. I think there will be some disappointment if they can't squeeze in. Not massive, but some.
Context is key.
Yes.
Because if they end up missing out and finishing 7th, we're all talking hypotheticals here. The vast majority of Hull FC fans would have snapped your hand off.
Yeah. Oh, completely.
But you're right. Given the nature of how the season's playing out, you'd be.
I think you'd be a little disappointed. Yeah, you'd be a little disappointed. Not massively gutted. A little disappointed.
They've made some good strides forward this year.
Yeah. Speaking of a little disappointed, that sums up this show, which we will bring to a close. Thanks for being with us. We will be back later in the week with our predictions. Stay with us for that because you need to see what crazy prediction Matt's going to make this week. I think he's going for a Salford Catalan win double, but you'll find out on that later in the week. On behalf of myself and Josh, thanks for being with us.
And above all else, enjoy rugby league. Take care.